videos embedded, and it's a little bit easier that way. All right, so let me share with you. Let's do that. So can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay, good deal. All right. So what I'm going to do here, we're going to start talking about the Roman Empire. All right. So like I was telling you guys, those of you with me last semester, historically speaking, when it comes to kind of like politics and governance and that, historians like to divide Rome into three eras. Roman monarchy, which begins with the founding of Rome by Romulus and Remus, and the first king of Rome after basically killing his brother, Romulus, where the name Rome comes from, through the sixth king, which is Tarquin the Proud, who was the Etruscan, who was the last monarch in Rome there after being overthrown by a group of patricians, the kind of upper class led by a guy named Lucius Junius Brutus to establish the Roman Republic. And we talked about the various institutions of the Republic in that. And then the empire. All right, which basically the late period of the Roman Republic was kind of marred by all these various civil wars led by various generals, and that the last one was between, excuse me, Octavian, who was Julius Caesar's adopted heir after Caesar was assassinated. The final death blow, of course, given to the ancestor of Lucius Junius Brutus, a guy named Marcus Junius Brutus. Between Octavian, that last civil war between Octavian and one of Caesar's top generals, a guy named Mark Antony. All right. As a result here, after the kind of defeating Mark Antony and Cleopatra, Octavian goes back to the Senate. He is basically given the title Augustus, which means the exalted one. So Augustus, Octavian, if you will, is considered the first emperor of Rome. First Roman emperor. A lot of times people believe it's Caesar, but Caesar never took that title, emperor. The title imperator was one of the titles. And Augustus is given various titles here. All right. He essentially learned from his uncle's mistakes. He returns to the Senate after defeating Mark Antony and Cleopatra and basically says, I'm, the first among equals. All right. I'm in your service, which they knew that wasn't the case. They knew that he had the power of the military behind him. So he was basically kind of bestowed this title imperator. All right. So this sense here where we start to see the kind of transition from republic to empire, in certain cases, there's not a whole lot that has changed. You still have the institutions that we talked about, the Senate and the council and the tribune and stuff like that. And for the most part, Rome had been operating as an empire by expanding its territory, if you will. But we see this new kind of introduction of a figure that would probably more kind of be like a dictator, but given the title imperator. All right. So this is a famous statue of Augustus here. And he ruled for about 41 years, which is a long period of time. Now, this statue at the bottom, a lot of times people tend to focus on the bottom there. It looks like the little baby. All right. That is actually the Cupid, god Cupid, riding a dolphin. Now, the dolphin signifies the naval battle of the Battle of Actium, which was the final battle in which Augustus defeats Mark Antony, and Cupid because Julius Caesar had claimed that the family had been descendant from the goddess Venus, the Greek, which was the Roman equivalent of the Greek goddess Aphrodite. In one story, Cupid is the son of Aphrodite. So that's why that is kind of placed into there. All right. And so Augustus, don't need to type this out for my pending Alzheimer's. Like I said, basically, he's going to also hold a number of positions like council. He really kind of rules as a dictator. He'll step down from the kind of councilship like it was kind of like, like intended to, but he would also take up like titles of tribune, censor, and stuff like that. So he was still basically kind of cloaking his power in this kind of sense of legitimacy. And like I said, he's learning from his uncle's mistakes. He's including these people in like kind of his kind of like sphere. All right. But there's no doubt about it. Like as Harry Truman famously said, the buck stops here. The buck stopped with Augustus. All right. That was basically he was the preeminent power. All right. Augustus also takes a number of honorific titles. Pontifex Maximus, which basically means he's the head of the state religion. And for the Romans, like a lot of these civilizations, religion and politics go hand in hand. Essentially, if you recognize the kind of Roman gods and goddesses, therefore you're going to recognize the Roman state. Pater Patre, which means father of the country. Also, he was given the title Princeps, the idea of being the first citizen. And then he took on the title, this kind of honorific title of Caesar, all right, which sets the pattern for the kind of Caesar being a synonymous title with emperor. All right. And so later in history, when you guys probably talked about World War One, the kind of the Russian monarchy, the head of the Russian monarchy was known as the Tsar, which was kind of Russian for Caesar. In Germany, they had a title referred to as Kaiser. Same idea here. All right. So he took on numerous titles, numerous positions and such. But the big one, obviously, was Imperator, which basically was emperor, if you will. All right. Also, too, he's going to, like his uncle, he's going to get things done. He's going to make some kind of wide sweeping changes, if you will. He has implemented a number of far-sighted policies, which is not inherently just in Roman kind of governance, but basically policies are just plans for governing. What he is essentially bringing in, is hearkening in, is this era that historians refer to as the Pax Romana. Pax meaning peace in Latin here. All right. So Pax, this was a 200-year period or so, in which it's a little misleading. It says the period of peace in the Mediterranean region. That's not necessarily completely accurate, because the Romans developing an empire are going to use their military might and conquest. What it signifies is that we don't find these number of kind of civil wars that marred the later half of the Roman Republic, starting with Marius and Sulla and ending with Octavian, Augustus, and Mark Antony. There's brief periods where we have maybe like a couple civil wars here and there in that period here between transitions of emperors, but for overwhelmingly, we don't have this kind of period of kind of civil kind of war, if you will. All right. So Augustus, and like tomorrow and Thursday, I'm going to talk about the other emperors of the Pax Romana. All right. Those who are the successors to Augustus, but he is going to lay the foundation down. And it's a pretty solid foundation when it comes to kind of imperator rule. All right. Also, too, you don't need to type this down for my pending Alzheimer's. He's going to try to make it a little bit more efficient way how Rome is governed, particularly in kind of like newly acquired provinces. Like his uncle before him, he's going to opening up the concept of citizenship to other people outside of Italy. All right. And so eventually the concept of being Roman is kind of like the concept of being American. It's not necessarily solely based on ethnicity, but based on citizenship. All right. And so he also wanted to kind of improve how those in basically serving more people as more managers and politicians. That meant, and in certain cases, kind of including the Senate. So what he does here is he kind of sets up an advisory council of senators to basically kind of essentially present his legislative agenda if need be. But it's an idea of kind of bringing senators into his circle as a means to, like that famous quote, keep your enemies close and maybe your enemies closer, right? Because again, Julius Caesar was murdered by a group of senators here. So Augustus, in a sense, understands that if you give these guys a sense that they still have some gravitas, they still have some importance, that you will prevent them from kind of revolting, if you will. All right. That was one of the ideas. However, they can make recommendations and things like that. It's ultimately the final decision is ultimately up to Augustus, if you will. All right. And so also too, he is going to establish an extensive civil service. Essentially, civil service is any type of kind of workers who are basically generally kind of paid directly by the state, by the government. It's believed that he established the first police force and fire department in Rome. A lot of the civil service was dealing with building of kind of public works projects, like building of roads, which the Romans had a lot of roads, amphitheaters, temples, stuff like that. The kind of structure that seemed to kind of identify the kind of Roman kind of engineering superiority, or at least the concept, like anybody who wasn't Roman in a sense was kind of barbarian to them. And one of the things was the access to clean water. So the Romans built a number of like kind of aqueducts that kind of traversed the entire empire. And these are kind of bridge-like structures that carry water. All right. And that was the thing that the Romans kind of felt they were cleaner than everybody, like Germanic and Celtic groups around them. And so at one point you had wealthy patricians that would pay for their water, to have like aqueducts directly to their villas and things of that nature. Tomorrow, while we're doing the notes, we'll talk about the Emperor Claudius. There's 3 main aqueduct systems that fed into Rome that were kind of like built during his reign. And in the video, they'll show you the kind of like the engineering that went behind the construction of aqueducts. All right. They can be very elaborate, like this illustration of an aqueduct that kind of crisscross each other. You still find some that are still standing, although they are not used for water distribution. But like most famously, one in Segovia, Spain. Basically, the city is like built around this aqueduct. This was built, I believe, during the time of Augustus. In southern France, this is one in Poitiers. All right, and you could kind of slightly see the kind of the sloping there of that. And again, the use of the kind of archway and the kind of the keystone are kind of key figures in Roman technology. The Romans are also credited with developing concrete. All right. So these are structures that are built, they're lasting like at least 1,000 years. All right. And then also too, we do see a kind of obviously an extensive system of kind of finance and economic system here. The kind of uniform currency of the Roman Empire was something called denarius. These predate Augustus. The use of denarius could date back to the time of the Punic Wars there. All right. But they kind of came like how the American dollar is, it's around the world. The American dollar is basically kind of the main currency that's traded in that. The Augustus does set up a tax system that kind of brings in about 10% of the kind of the gross national product of the empire. Initially under Augustus, there was no income tax. But eventually this tax system is in many cases can be a burden on most Romans, particularly those who are, the proletariat. And then and again, there's numerous factors on what led to the fall of the Roman Empire. There was an entire book written on that. One of the factors people tend to look on is that there's a kind of a tax policy, but doesn't really provide a whole lot of services. All right. That's one of the multiple factors that led to that. But again, this is like any type of kind of large empire is going to need to extract quite a bit of money through taxation. This is an example of denarius. These are actually denarius coined during the time of Julius Caesar. All right. Don't need to type this down, pending Alzheimer's. Also, he is essentially going to try to prevent those civil wars that had occurred because soldiers were more beholden to their generals. And what Augustus does is basically takes what generals had traditionally done was providing salary and pensions and that to their soldiers that basically give that responsibility to the state. All right. So that was a means to try to kind of prevent these civil wars. Now, as time goes on, you'll find a number of generals that are actually going to kind of parlay their military service into governance, and they're going to see a number of emperors that come from the military. But Augustus was trying to stem this kind of series of civil wars as a result of that. All right. And then with that here, we see he opened up the Roman military to, much like how Caesar did when he was in Gaul, to what they call auxiliary forces, groups that were not necessarily of kind of in the Roman society. These guys would be given like 2/3 of a kind of a legionnaire salary, but they would open them to the opportunity to becoming citizens, which was a big deal. All right. Also, during the time of Augustus, there was an establishment called the Praetorian Guard, which was essentially the idea they were elite soldiers. They were kind of there to protect Rome. But in reality, what they were there is basically they were kind of like the bodyguards and the secret service for the emperor. All right. In certain cases, they would serve as almost like spies for the emperor, particularly if the emperor was not himself in Rome per se. However, you have a number of Praetorian Guards who kind of overstep their kind of authority a bit. One we'll talk about tomorrow, a guy named Sejanus, who was the head of the Praetorian Guard under Tiberius, who Tiberius thought actually killed his son. this is a position that was open primarily initially only to those of the kind of the highest class, if you will. But this was started by Augustus, and then also as an empire, you're going to kind of expand your borders here. Augustus officially brings in Egypt into the Roman Empire after defeating Mark Antony and Cleopatra. That's important because Egypt was the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. Most of the grain that was coming into the main port in Rome of Ostia came from Egypt and North Africa. Spain, although Spain had been part of the Roman sphere of influence dating back to the Punic Wars, the entire kind of like Iberian Peninsula was kind of conquered during the time of Augustus. And also there's cities that are still around today that were founded during the reign of Augustus. Turin in northern Italy, Barcelona in Spain, Nimes in France, Trier in Germany, which is considered the oldest city in Germany. The second oldest city in Germany is the city of Augsburg, which is named after Augustus, and Tangier and Beirut, both in the Middle East. These are all cities that are still standing today with large populations that were founded during the time of Augustus. So for the most part, militarily, the Romans under Augustus, the Roman Empire is expanding. One area, though, that the Romans tend to have a kind of problem with throughout their history is the region of Germania, what we refer to as basically Germany, right? And so the kind of the significant defeat that was really historians tend to talk about during the reign of Augustus occurred in AD 9. All right, which was towards the tail end of his reign at a place called Teutoburg in what is now Germany, Westphalia. This was considered the worst defeat in about 200 years. Depending on what historian you read, it's about 4 or 5 legions that were completely wiped out. I'm talking about 20,000 men. All right, that were either killed or basically kind of enslaved. The Germanic tribe that defeats the Romans here was a tribe called the Cherusci. Now, the Cherusci were led by a guy named Arminius, who was actually a Roman citizen. He was a Cherusci who had served in the auxiliary Roman force that had deserted, and he knew Roman military tactics and was able to basically ambush these legions. He's referred to in history as Hermann the German, and there's a kind of a big monument dedicated to him in West Germany. All right. According to a couple of the historians, Suetonius and Livy, I believe, Augustus was so distraught by this defeat that he would walk around his villa, kind of banging his head on the wall, saying, "Varius, who was the Roman general who led these legions, I want my legions back." The problem is Varius had died in the battle. He actually took his own life. But this is really the only significant kind of defeat that occurred during the age of Augustus. All right. And then back to kind of policies and politics here. He is trying to kind of bring back traditional values. He was very kind of culturally very conservative. He encouraged legislation to encourage marriage and childbearing, particularly financial incentives there. And with that, there was also financial penalties for those who were unmarried and childless, if you will. He himself, though, his marriage was not the problem was his wife was married at the time. So he basically, according to the stories, he basically approached her at a party and said that you are no longer married to that guy, you're married to me. All right. And so he kind of forced a divorce and married her. I believe Livia was her name. And so and the marriage lasted for the rest of his life. But in AD 14, he's gonna pass away here. Another thing that he is kind of credited with here is the reestablishment of this kind of concept called pietas, which was the idea that Romans owed loyalty to family, particularly kind of the heads of family, the patriarchs, and to the gods of Rome. All right. With that, he had restored temples, brought back some religious ceremonies that dated back to the time of even the monarchy there. He made adultery a criminal offense. Matter of fact, he even exiled his daughter for publicly acknowledging an affair, flaunting an affair. He had a friend of his who was the Roman poet Ovid, who wrote these kind of what they call kind of erotic poems, these love poems. He had him exiled for writing these poems because he felt they were a little scandalous, if you will. If you read them now, they're really not that scandalous. But again, he was trying to kind of establish this kind of a conservative social kind of society there. So that's the notes for today. Let's see. Was that all right? Was I moving too fast? I can never tell when I don't see your guys' faces.
You did great.
Thanks. I really need that. Appreciate that. So, let's see. Tomorrow, we'll meet back at the same time. I'll talk about the kind of the Emperors of the Pax Romana. And like I said, I'll do notes from the board. We'll have a couple of videos, short videos kind of thrown in there. So make sure you submit this back for a grade. If you guys have any questions or concerns, holler at me. All right. Sound good?
Yep.
All right. Have a good rest of your day, guys.